Again, my name is Jack Seguir. I work out of the Loudon campus financial aid office. While I am at Nova, the information that we're going to be covering tonight in our 101 session is universal. Financial aid, both the process, the types of funds that are received, the different sources of money, be them federal, state, or local government, or the school itself. They don't change much, or the process doesn't change much from school to school. So this is pretty much universal information. If there's anything that's very specific to a 2-year college or a 4-year college, public or private, I'll try to point that out. But keep in mind this material is universal between Nova, between George Mason, Virginia Tech, UVA, Harvard University as well. Financial aid and the financial aid process doesn't really change from school to school. The amounts of money that are available are what really changes. So what are we getting covered tonight? What is the definition of financial aid? What does a financial aid office mean by financial aid versus the average layperson? There is somewhat of a different expectation between people who are applying for financial aid and actual financial aid officers, what we call financial aid funds. We're going to talk about how financial aid awards are calculated and why that matters to you who may never work in financial aid, but why it's important that you know how they're calculated. We'll talk about the types of funding and how you can receive them, whether they be grants, loans, scholarships, work study funds, and what those dips at, what kind of rules, regulations, policies might be tied to those sources of funding. We'll talk about who is eligible, because when we talk about financial aid, we generally are talking about something called the FAFSA, which does have some eligibility criteria to it. We'll also talk about something called the VASA, which is a separate application for students who may not be able to fill out the FAFSA. We'll make sure we clarify that for families. And we'll also talk about these changes. About 4 years ago, as part of one of those COVID relief bills, one of those first COVID relief bills, they input a extra piece of legislation called FAFSA simplification, which is what it sounds like. It's supposed to reduce the size of the financial aid application, make it easier for families and students to apply, and actually increase the amount of funds that go out to families. It did its job, but it was a very difficult process and has been quite a interesting year in the financial aid world. You all will be entering, as early as 2025, 2026. Hopefully, a lot of the changes that were problematic have been ironed out, but I'm going to try to hit on those as we go through the presentation so that you all know what to expect. If you've done a financial aid application prior to 24, 25, and you're expecting to see the same thing that might have been a year ago, 2 years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, it is completely different. And some of those changes, most of the changes are for the better, but there's little roadblocks or unintended roadblocks that have come up in a couple places, and we're going to try to iron those out and make sure that you're aware of them before you actually file a FAFSA later this year. Now, again, what are we doing here? We're defining financial aid. What is financial aid? So when you're talking with a college, you're talking with the school itself, schools are going to consider financial aid funds that you are bringing that do not come directly from your pocket, that you're bringing from the table from the financial aid application, but also from maybe scholarships that you win from outside entities, tuition assistance programs, tuition reimbursement programs that you receive from an employer or a family's employer, even veterans benefits that you might receive from either the GI Bill or from being on active duty. All of these funds can be considered financial aid resources, and the idea is they help bridge the gap between the cost of college and what a family can afford on their own. The way that a college determines what that amount that you can afford on your own is, what you're going to pay out of pocket, is by filling out something called the FAFSA application, or the free application for federal student aid. Keyword there is free, that first word. It is a free application. It's supposed to put money into your pocket, not take money out of your pocket. There are some nebulous entities out there that charge you to fill out the free application. You should never make use of those. You should always work with either your high school, your career center, or the college that you're attending if you need assistance in filling out that application. It is supposed to be fairly straightforward. It is supposed to be something that both student and family can complete in a short period of time. We're talking less than an hour, once a year, every year, to determine financial aid eligibility. And yet the website is studentaid.gov. It's at do.gov. We're not visiting any other website but studentaid.gov to complete our financial aid application. The point of the financial aid application is to establish something called the Student Aid Index, and again, compare that against the cost of attendance from the college. What do we mean by those two acronyms? Again, very important that we understand the differences. what's in differences, but what is included in cost of attendance and what's included in student aid index. So the cost of attendance, you can think of that as a sticker price of the college. What does the college cost to not only be attending and sitting in class and have the books and materials that you need, but also to be alive, to have the living expenses that you need covered for a 9-month period of time, which is usually fall and spring semesters. So that's going to be cost for food, cost for living, room and board, personal expenses, travel expenses. Colleges that have large populations of out-of-state students will include an out-of-state cost of travel to get there to their institution. They'll usually include an average for how far people are coming, an average airfare or train or other type of transportation costs to their institution. They'll incur personal expenses like hygiene, even an entertainment kind of piece, the general expenses. They'll include those expenses for the required things that you have to be paying to be sitting in class, like tuition and fees. But a lot of these other segments of cost of attendance are they vary. The variance is wide. Some students pay a lot for room and board, some pay very little. If you're living at home when you're going to a four-year institution, your room and board costs, they may be relatively low. Maybe you're being charged tuition, or maybe you're being charged rent. That's always possible. But generally, they're very much lower than they would be if you're living on campus. So when you look at a price of a college and you Google the price of a college today, you're going to see a one lump sum figure. And in four-year institutions in Virginia, that's usually in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. That figure is 9 months of cost. It's very important to understand. It's not what you're paying up front your freshman year, your fall semester of your freshman year. It's what you're paying over the course of a fall semester and a spring semester, and what you're paying for living expenses as well, not just tuition and fees. The general idea is that colleges want to advertise what the normal student is going to pay in the direct costs, which again, tuition and fees, and the indirect costs with all those living expenses to be a college student. And that means that everyone lives differently, and those costs for everyone's going to be a little bit differently. You can't just rely on a single number for what you expect college to cost you. If a student is used to eating top ramen, that has a much different cost structure than someone who's used to eating filet, right? Or sirloin, right? If we have different expectations of how we're going to live or how we're going to eat, the kind of personal expenses that we're going to incur while we're in school, our cost of attendance is going to be unique for each individual. However, the college just uses one number and they use an average for cost of attendance. The school is going to compare that number to your student aid index, SAI. This used to be called the expected family contribution. If you're used to a different figure, again, it was the EFC for a very long time. Now it's the student aid index. And the idea of the student aid index is it's a measure of a student's ability to pay. It's an index of a student's ability to pay compared against other individuals who are filling out that FAFSA. And so the idea would be if Bill Gates, Elon Musk filled out a FAFSA, they'd be at the very top of that index. They would have the maximum student aid index allowance. And they would be treated as justly as if they had all the resources necessary to pay for school. Someone with no resources, no income, would be at the very bottom of that index. The SAI can go from negative 1,500 all the way up to 999,000 and everywhere in between. And that figure is what colleges are going to use to calculate our financial aid eligibility. It is a rough estimate. I'll say rough here because it's an estimate for everyone, but a rough estimate of what a family can provide out of pocket for the year. So theoretically, if you had a 10,000, what do I use here, a 10,000 student aid index, and you had a cost of attendance at your institution of $25,000 for the school year, you would be left with $15,000 of unmet financial need, right? Though that is the maximum amount of money for your particular situation, your particular application that a college would be able to provide you in need-based financial aid. Need-based financial aid are going to be grants, scholarships, some forms of loan funding. It's really important that you know this, not because I expect you to be financial aid advisors at one point or to go into a career in the field. Hey, it's a great field. You know, we need more people. If you're interested, let me know. But this is the calculation that's used for every school. It's cost of attendance minus student aid index. Yes, there's some differences here and there in how cost of attendance is calculated and how student aid index might be calculated, a particular institution, especially for their own institutional funding. But across the board, for the most part, this is the calculation. This is how Harvard processes aid. This is how George Mason processes aid. This is how Cal State, Caltech institutions across the country process aid. And if you know this, you can take an estimate of your student aid index today, whether or not you're a senior, parent of a senior, or whether you're an underclassman, and you can get a pretty good idea of what your unmet need would be at any institution in the country. And we can take that a step further with this thing called a net price calculator we were looking at just a minute ago. And you can take basically a miniature FAFSA, complete a miniature FAFSA application with each college individually, and get something called a net price, which is approximately what you're going to be paying out of pocket after they factor in the grants and scholarships they expect you to receive. There should be no surprises for most families into what they're going to receive in financial aid. I know that a lot of times we think we need to wait and see what happens, and we need to wait for an award letter, and we need to hope that we get what we need to be able to make a college work. For most part, we can find out today, guys, because the calculation is not going to change. And usually the types of funding and the amounts of funding that are available for colleges do not drastically change from year to year. If we were to look at our student aid index today, it's going to give us an estimate of our federal financial aid funding. And we can then go a step further and look at that net price calculator to give it a pretty good idea of the financial aid awards we'll have at any school in the country. And knowing is half the battle. It's really what it comes down to. Number one factor influencing whether or not a student goes to a college is not the academic requirements. It is, can I afford it? Academic requirements is second. Can I get in? Can I do the work? Do I have what I need to meet the entry requirements? That is not as difficult for most families as making college affordable, making it work financially. And so again, very important that we have an idea of what we can expect to pay out of pocket, expect to receive in financial aid as early as possible. And because this calculation is really straightforward and simplistic, most of us should have that information available to us and be able to use those calculations. Again, right now, for underclassmen, you have a middle schooler. I have elementary school students. I'm doing their SAI calculations today just because, I can't help myself. I want to try to figure out what we can expect for financial aid in the future. To get access to these funds, there are some requirements. To fill out the FAFSA, there are hard set requirements that you must meet. You must be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. Eligible non-citizens are permanent residents, green card holders. They are approved asylees, approved refugees, cannot be pending, can't have applied and be waiting on that application to be approved. You have to be approved. If you're approved asylee, approved refugee, we all are eligible. And if we're on humanitarian parolee status, which is going to be a lot of individuals from Afghanistan and Ukraine, those individuals could apply for financial aid and may qualify as well. We meet those statuses. We have a valid social security number. I put valid social security number on here, not just because you need to have a social. If you're in one of these statuses, you will have a social. You need to type your social in correctly. And that goes hand in hand with any other demographic information that you're providing on the FAFSA. You must type in the right demographic info. The biggest unforced error that we see in financial aid is mistyped socials, mistyped names, mistyped dates of birth. All this information is screened through the Social Security Agency, databases that are available to the Department of Education. And if your data doesn't match the information that's on your federal records with either the Social Security Agency or, for example, Department of Homeland Security, if you're on a permanent resident status, or if you're on asylee status, refugee status, you can have problems. Your FAFSA may not be processed. You may not actually get your application sent to the college that you're trying to attend. So when we're filling out the application, I know we can type incredibly quickly. I know we got those words per minute numbers that are very, very high, and that's great. But we want to be be very careful and be very calculated as we plug in all of our demographic info. Making a mistake here is not something that you want to do. We must have a high school diploma or GED. So we have to graduate, right? No senioritis, must pass those SOLs, cannot receive financial aid with a certificate of completion. You must have your high school diploma, must have standard diploma, advanced diploma, or a GED. Yes, homeschooling could work as well, but you must have a completed high school credential and you must have that completed diploma to receive financial aid. You must be pursuing a degree as well. You can't just be saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to randomly take classes. You do have to be pursuing coursework towards a particular program. There are general studies degrees at many institutions that students probably would go into if they haven't declared a major yet, but there has to be an intent of getting a degree from the student to receive financial aid. If we meet that basic criteria, we can fill out a FAFSA. And what we qualify for is going to depend again on that student aid index and that unmet financial need calculation. The types of funding that we can receive vary. We can receive grants. Grants are what everyone wants. That's what everyone thinks about when they think of financial aid. When you see financial aid like in the news or on social media or as part of like some sitcom special, they're always talking about the free money. They're not really talking about the other things that we're going to get to. But the free money is great, and it's what we all want. Grants are funds that do not have to be paid back so long as we complete our courses, right? So long as we complete our courses, we attend, we participate, we will not pay back those grant funds. There are three sources of grant funding. We can receive federal grants, we can receive state grants, we can receive institutional or school grants. Generally speaking, most colleges are going to have the federal and the state grants that you are eligible for pre-built into something called a packaging formula, a packaging plan. And you're going to have certain levels of unmet need, certain levels of that unmet need from that cost of attendance minus SAI calculation to receive those grants. You do not have to tell a school, I want the Pell Grant. You don't have to tell a school, I want the state grant. They are going to automatically screen you for any grant eligibility that you have simply based on that student aid calculation. Now, there are specific programs, want to make sure we're all aware of them. The federal Pell Grant program is the largest grant program that exists. It is, again, what most people think of when they think of federal grants because it's what's been given out for many, many years now. Maximum award is $7,400 per school year, not per semester, per school year. And it is something that is very strictly tied to either your student aid index or your income level. If you were to fill out a student aid index estimate, just right on this screen here, again, I'll make sure everyone has these slides. You can type in student aid estimator into Google, go to the studentaid.gov website. It's a mini FAFSA that gives you your student aid index today. That student aid index will equal a certain Pell Grant award, and you can find it out today. It does not change from school to school. You get the same Pell Grant award at the University of Maryland as you get at Northern Virginia Community College. Same Pell Grant award at Harvard as you get at George Mason. That number does not change, and it is set in stone no matter when you apply. There are some other federal grant programs that are somewhat common. The Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, FSEOG. It's a mouthful. We got a lot of acronyms. We got way too many terminology. I'm going to throw a bunch of them at you tonight. But that FSEOG program is a pool of funds that are given to the highest need students. Generally, those are students with the lowest SAIs at the institution, and then they go up from there if there's additional funding available for the college. The TEACH grant, Teacher Education Assistance for College and Higher Education grant, the TEACH grant is a cool program that helps individuals who are doing teacher preparation programs get an additional grant to pay for their teacher prep program for 4 years. The issue is there is a work requirement when you leave school. If you sign up for the grant and you are eligible, you must work in a HUD-1 school, which means poverty level in the school is below a certain point for a certain number of years after you graduate, or all of the grants get converted to loans and you have to pay them back. And unfortunately, some students don't realize that, are not aware of that, have some issues in locating employment at a eligible institution, and you can have bad things happen where your grants become loans. So it's a great program if you're dead set on becoming a teacher, but you want to research the program and make sure you are ready for the work requirements afterwards if you want to pursue that particular grant. As far as state grants go, as I mentioned, most colleges, most institutions in the state of Virginia, most institutions that I know at other states are going to have a preset formula that says, if you have this SAI, this unmet need, we give you this grant. For the Virginia Guaranteed Assistance Program and the Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant, the first and third ones that are listed here, there is also a component of, besides need, of high-performing high school student. High-performing high school student is usually tied to GPA in high school, and it's going to vary from college to college. Some colleges have a 3.0 requirement, some have a 2.5 requirement, some have a higher requirement. It just really depends. The reason I point these two out, besides the fact that they have to have your high school GPA, the Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant, the VTAG program, actually has an application. So a 2-page, I believe, paper application that needs to be completed and turned into your college's financial aid office, but it's for private colleges in Virginia only private schools, not public. So or Hollins University, Randolph-Macon, Washington Lee, Shenandoah, Roanoke, University of Richmond. Those are just some of the ones that are private institutions in Virginia that may require that separate application. It's one of the only separate applications that really exists for traditional financial aid. The Commonwealth Grant, Commonwealth Award that's listed there, that is pretty much set in stone as part of a packaging plan. You either qualify or you do not. Usually students are eligible for Commonwealth Awards that may not be eligible for Pell Grant money, they may be eligible for Commonwealth Award instead. There's a higher threshold of eligibility for Commonwealth Award recipients. But state grant funding is limited. It is limited. So we'll get to this a little bit later, but just like there are deadlines for filling out your application to college, there are deadlines for filling out your application for financial aid. And if you do not meet those deadlines, while you will be eligible for any federal financial aid, federal Pell Grant, or federal loans that exist for your income level, you may not be eligible for state grant funding because it's first come, first served. And there's always more students that are eligible for the state grant than we have money to go around. So that's why meeting deadlines for financial aid are so very important. And we'll hit on that a little bit later in a little more detail. Last pool of funding that we can receive grants from is going to be institutional school grants. If you have a family member, friend, relative that says, I got a full ride, right? I got a full ride to the private school. That money's not coming from the state. That's not coming from the federal government. That's coming from the school itself. Schools have, I don't want to say the most flexibility, they have a lot of flexibility, especially if they have large endowments, if they have a lot of their own resources. So it's important to understand that some of the biggest changes in financial aid awards could be because of the state or the school financial aid resources that they're providing you. It's also important to understand, and we'll see this a little bit as we go along, that it's in the college's interest to raise its cost of attendance, to inflate its cost of attendance, so they can give more school aid, right? Go back to this calculation real quick. If you are in this situation and you have a student with a $25,000, 10, but 25,000 student aid index, zero unmet need, that college would not be able to offer that student any funding, right? They're not allowed to, they're not able to. There's no unmet need. They cannot give them that resource. However, if the college's cost of attendance all of a sudden was $5,000 higher, that 25,000 SAI student can then get a grant. They're not going to get a state grant. They're not going to get a federal grant, but they could get a college grant. And that's why I'm really harp on that cost of attendance being unique from student to student, because in my experience, colleges inflate their costs as much as possible to allow them to have more flexibility to offer aid. And you can see just from this calculation why that would be the case. The only downside is that you might advertise a higher cost to your other students, but you can always do the wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're going to give you a grant that usually happens in those higher cost schools. Now, I'm not dismissing state or school institutional aid. It is one of the only ways that, again, a student is going to get a full ride at most of the institutions in the country. But you want to be aware, just because a school gives you a grant does not make it the best place for you. What is the net cost? That's what you always want to be looking at. Just because they give you a $10,000, $20,000 grant, if their costs are $20,000 or $30,000 higher than your in-state or other options, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a better deal for you financially. So again, net cost is very important. Just because you receive a grant doesn't mean that that's a college you should select. You want to make sure that you're looking at what you're truly going to be paying out of pocket when you subtract the overall cost of that institution. If they have higher tuition and fees than they have living expenses, you're not going to get out of paying tuition and fees. You can change your living expenses by choosing a different way to live, having lower expenses, lower costs. There's nothing you can do to reduce the tuition and fees so directly. So just want to keep that in mind and make sure we're getting institutional aid. That's wonderful. Make sure we're comparing that against the total cost of the institution, not just the fact that, hey, they gave me a grant, they like me. Because believe me, you're paying them thousands of dollars. They're going to like you. It's a matter of whether you like them too. The next pool of funding we have available is work study funds. Work study is a smaller program than most other grants, loans that we're going to talk about in a second here, but it's an awesome program to get students real life work experience on campus. Generally, you're going to be working in office settings. You're usually going to be working for something like the financial aid office, the student development office, student activities, somewhere along the line where you're a front-facing individual, helping your fellow students with day-to-day tasks or getting help from the particular office that you're working in. The thing with work study is it's a pool of funding that the college is given to hire a student that they wouldn't have otherwise. So colleges love it because it gets us student workers. Students hopefully love it because it's convenient. You don't have to travel off campus usually. You don't necessarily need transportation. You can go to class in one hall, one building, walk down the hall, walk to the next building to go to your work for the day. If you do good work, they'll like to have you back. You've got a job for 2 years, you got a job for 4 years. And usually, my experience, you get very good recommendation letters because, hey, we know how important that is to you and we want to do and set you up for success. I'll tell you, I have work studies that work in my office in financial aid. They know more about financial aid than many of our advisors, and they certainly know enough to help themselves and maximize the amount of money that they have access to. It is a really big boon for them. That all being said, usually it's a competitive program. It is need based. You must have financial need. You must have unmet financial need in order to qualify, and it is competitive. There's usually more students who are interested in a job through the campus, through work study, than there are jobs to give out and funding to go around. So if any of that interests you, if you think you might be working while you're in school, you absolutely should visit the college's website that you'll be attending and see how their work study program is processed, how their work study program is managed. Is it first come, first serve? Is it based on highest unmet financial need? Do you have to be meeting certain parameters? Do you have to have previous experience to qualify for certain jobs? Those are all things that you should be trying to find out if you're interested in the work study program. Wonderful program, awesome if you're going to work on campus. Highly recommended to students if you know that you want to earn some of those soft office skills that you don't always get from working, retail jobs, food service jobs that we usually find as college students. Next pool of funding we spend a little bit more time on, student loans. Loans are a necessary part of the financial aid process for many families. They are not, we don't always think of them as financial aid, but the reality is for many individuals, they are a form of financial aid because we're receiving student loans, at least from the financial aid application, that we wouldn't be able to get on the private market, right? The interest rates are subsidized by the government. The repayment plans are 10 years. The starting repayment plan, standard repayment plan is 10 years. There is no payments required while you're in college on student loans from the financial aid application. You can prepay, there's no prepayment penalty, but you're not required to. You get to finish your degree, graduate, you even get a 6-month grace period upon graduation to find the job, get yourself set up financially until you have to start making payments. There's no credit check. When you get a student loan from the FAFSA, there is no credit check. There is no income check. There is no measure of credit worthiness or whether or not you can pay it back. If a 16-year-old is admitted to college, they can fill out a FAFSA and we can give them a student loan. Again, the student, a student loan. Parents may be included as part of the application process, but they are not responsible for the student loans that are received from the financial aid application. A very important point to make, very important that you're all aware of. Sometimes I get asked, why fill out the FAFSA if I have high income? I'm never going to get any kind of grant money. Well, the student loans that you receive from the FAFSA are usually the best financing tool available to anyone. Even on the private market, even if you have stellar credit, it's very difficult to beat their interest rates, which for this year are 6.5%, but they're updated every year. They very likely will go down next year since we recently had a very large decrease in the federal funds interest rates. I think it's going to probably be down to the 6% range. But the loans are fixed for the life of the loan. They're not variable. They do not adjust. There is a maximum amount of $5,500 that you can receive as a freshman. That goes up to $6,500 for a sophomore, $7,500 for a junior and senior. Just little spelling error or error on this page. They're not Stafford loans anymore, guys. They are federal direct loans. So we're on the same page. Stafford used to be the naming. It's the federal direct student loans now. But there is still a $5,500 cap as a freshman, $6,500 as a sophomore, $7,500 as junior and senior. So again, you asked me the question, I'm not going to get a grant. I don't think I'll qualify for a grant. Well, you'll qualify for a loan. And these loans, again, are the student's name only. Parents are not responsible for them. We wanted students to have a little skin in the game. Maybe we were planning on paying, maybe we were planning on borrowing, but this gives students skin in the game because it's their responsibility to pay it back. So students who are on this call, pay attention. Parents can promise that they'll help you pay these loans back. They are not legally required to. Parents, you should know that you're not legally required to help pay these loans back from the federal financial aid application. There are two types of student loans that you can receive, a subsidized version and an unsubsidized version. The subsidized version is a need-based loan. So you have to have that unmet need still. You have unmet need, any level of unmet need, you can get a subsidized loan, which does not accrue interest while you're in college. That 6.5% is paid on your behalf by the government while you're enrolled in school. You're enrolled in school for 4 years, 5 years, the entire time that interest is not accruing in your name. The small benefit, but still, could be a couple $1,000s over the life of the loan nonetheless. Unsubsidized loans are what we can give to anyone, what Bill Gates will qualify for, what someone will qualify for at the top of the SAI bracket, but it is still a relatively low interest rate for no credit check, no income check, and no measure of credit worthiness. So that all being said, they are good loans. They are probably the best loans that most of us can receive, but they are still debt, right? They are still debt. And what I encourage everyone to just understand, own, and eventually do some research on is, what will my debt level look like, right? And the reason I have to say that is that 65% of college graduates have debt. It's not a small number, right? It's not a couple people. It's not them over there. It's most of us. So if most of us are going to graduate, most of us are going to have some form of debt, we should talk that way. And we shouldn't hope for the best. We should talk in a way that's, I'm going to have debt. I'm going to borrow money to go to school. My family's going to borrow money in some capacity. What does that amount look like in the long run? And does that amount look like something that's affordable to me, and something that's affordable for the lifestyle that I want to live, the job that I want to have, and the location I want to be in the country whenever I graduate, right, wherever I settle? All those things are really important. And the reason I bring this up in this kind of meeting is because you don't get to make this decision when you graduate, right? You don't get to decide how much you're borrowing when you graduate and whether you can pay it back or not. But that's what I see a lot of students doing. I see them addressing these issues as a senior, or as someone who's just graduated and is trying to figure out how they're going to pay back the debt they've incurred. So knowing upfront what you're going to pay, very big, very important. We'll talk about a couple other ways you can figure that out a little bit later on. Knowing how much money you're going to receive in financial aid. Again, we talked about that. You can get a pretty good estimate today. That's important. That knowing how much you're then going to have to borrow, what the gap you're going to have to close against the other resources that you have available, maybe in 529 plans or in general savings, all really important to make a decision about what you think you'll borrow over 4 years. You should do that. And if you do that, you can then go further and take some go further with your calculations to see, what's my payment going to look like. The parents, students, strongly encourage you to talk about debt from the perspective of monthly amounts, not overall amounts. Most of us have no idea what $30,000 means, especially if we're in high school and we've not borrowed money before. You say $30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 60,000. Those are all just numbers for the most part. You want to talk about the actual impact to your day-to-day life, which is going to be your monthly payment. The average graduate graduating with almost $30,000 of debt will pay $325 a month for 10 years after they graduate. You have to take a step back and think to yourself, is that a lot of money? Does that fit the lifestyle, the choices I want to make as far as career, location, whether I'm going to start a family, buy a home? Does that fit into those? And if it does right now, great. You got a good plan. But if you're looking at that number today and you say, that number is really high, I don't know how that's going to fit. I don't know if it's going to be the right thing for me. I don't know if I'm going to have a job in the field that I think I'm going to get a degree in that's going to be able to afford that. You can make different decisions today. You will not be able to make different decisions when you're a junior and you try to figure this out, or as a senior, try to figure this out. You've already made them. You sunk costs. It's already there. So even though and this is not fair, because let's just be clear, this isn't fair. It's not fair that 17, 18, 19-year-olds have to make these big decisions about how much am I paying and whether or not that's the best investment for me. But that's the world we're in right now. And most colleges are not going to provide a financial advisor that tells you whether or not you can really afford this. They just aren't. It's not in the business model. So it's up to you as a family, up to you as a student, parent, to empower your student, be thinking about how much we will borrow and whether or not that makes sense for the career and the lifestyle that we want to live. Okay, scare everyone a little bit with loans. Always have some reality what we're probably going to borrow. Then let's go back to how can we get some more money? How can we minimize the amount of loans that we will need to borrow? The big thing for me is going to be scholarships. Final real big pool of funding that's available to students. Scholarships are very similar to grants in that they generally do not have to be paid back as long as you complete your courses, but they are, instead of only being need-based, they could be need-based. They could also be need-based and merit-based. Usually you are applying, you are competing, you're writing an application, completing an essay, writing an essay, maybe even a couple essays, saying why that organization or that group or that person who's giving a scholarship should pick you and not the 2 or 10 or 100 other people that have written essays. And so it is a competition. You do need to sell yourself in your essay. You need to say why you're great. You need to be a little pompous without being pompous, right? You need to tell everyone why they should pick you. And you do have to do it, I want to say in an essay, you have to do it in writing, right? You generally are not doing interviews. So you want to have that kind of thought process. And you also have to keep in mind that it's not just a one size fits all application. It's going to be multiple applications with maybe multiple different types of essays or maybe changes to the essay that you need to write. That being said, it's worth it. It's worth the payoff, right? You spend 40 hours applying for scholarships, which no one does. And there's not a single student that does that. I tell you, they can tell you, oh, yeah, I spent 40 hours applying. No, they did. I know you did. It's too much time. I don't see it. You spend 40 hours applying, though. You win $1,000. You paid yourself $25 an hour. You win 500. You pay yourself $12.50 an hour simply for sitting in front of a computer and writing about yourself and reading things online. It is a great money maker. Honestly, people can make more money applying for scholarships than almost any career they're going to have later on with their degree. You just can't get scholarships forever to live off of. But they are the difference maker between borrowing more, paying more out of pocket, and having that more comfortable financial kind of time while you're in school. Two big things as far as applying for scholarships that keep us from applying. The first thing is the essay. You got to write it. You need to write at least one. And many times you'll have to edit that one to make it fit the scholarship you're applying to. However, and I don't have this up here, I'm going to give you 4 quick little topics that you should write about in a scholarship essay. And then you don't have to repeat them. You can copy and paste it into 75% of the applications out there. Topic 1, paragraph 1, introduce yourself. Who are you? What makes you unique? What is your drive in life? Family focused, career focused, care about the environment. What is your drive? What do you want to do with yourself? What makes you get up in the morning? Number 2, what are your educational goals? Why do you have them? The important part there is why do you have them? Not just what they are, but why do you have them? A couple sentences on why you chose to be in that particular field. Number 3, professional goals. Why do you want to work in that career field? Why do you want to work in that area? What has driven you to want to be in this profession? And then the 4th topic, and you would tie this together with your other 3, what have you overcome in life? Give us a trial, a tribulation, something, conflict that you have overcome, worked through, and been successful overcoming. If a scholarship donor is giving you $1,000, they're choosing to give the student $1,000 to go to college rather than giving $1,000 to a charity. They know what that charity does. They're aware. They have public books for the most part. They do not know you. You're kind of a blank slate. So you have to explain in that essay, not just who you are, but why giving you the money is going to be beneficial and why giving you the money is going to be, it's a good investment, right? The first time that you have a difficult class and you're using that $1,000 to pay for the class, you're going to find out a way to make it work and pass. You're not going to withdraw and say, no, that's not for me. So you can try to show that with either 1 example, 2 examples, 3 examples, how you overcome adversity. Could be academic, could be family related, could be work related. Just show us that you can overcome adversity in your essay. I would encourage you to do that. You put those 4 topics together. And again, copy and paste as your friend makes it a lot easier to apply for the scholarships that you do find, which leads me to the other reason that we don't apply for scholarships. Where are they? How do I find them? Every day I get asked that question. And I know that every student is looking for just a silver bullet, right? They just want a link. Do you have a link? Do you have a website? That's usually what I hear. And if there was a link, if there was a website, guys, what would happen? Everyone would use it. And then the competition would be not a competition of a couple people or tens of people, it would be hundreds or thousands. We already have that. If you Google scholarships right now, you don't find individual scholarships, you find search engines. And there's nothing wrong with a scholarship search engine as long as you know what it is. It is an aggregator of scholarships that the individual who has put that together is using to collect your data and will then sell your data for a profit. That's why they exist. They are providing you legitimate scholarship information at the expense of your privacy, your data privacy. And so be aware of that. If you're going to apply for scholarships online, you want to use a separate email from your personal email. You want to use an email you're okay with getting spammed. You want to know that, yes, you can win a scholarship through using an online search engine, but you can also get a job through a search engine, online search engine. You're going to be competing with everyone in the country. And yeah, you can get it, but you're going to have a much lower likelihood of success. I encourage families, I encourage students to use search engines as your last resort. First things that you should be doing is trying to find, just like finding a job. If I have a cousin that works at the place that I want to get a job in, I'm going to tell them, get me a job. And if they don't get me a job, I'm going to call their mom. If I have a job online that I'm applying to, like if I'm applying on monster.com, indeed.com, I might be lucky. I might be fortunate. I might get in front of the HR reviewer's eyes, but I've got a much lower chance of success because of the volume that they're going to be seeing. So look local first. You should be looking at the college or the school you're currently attending. LCPS offers a large group of scholarships that comes out through School Links every January. Every January, they're available. Make sure you're paying attention to that. You should also be applying to any local organization that you volunteer with, nonprofit that you work with or parents work with, that you have some connection to, or it works in the field of study that you want to be in. You should also be looking at the colleges that you're attending. Every college that you're attending are going to be using, and I'm sorry if I got that wrong, schooling, I guess those schooling, yes. Every scholarship that you're attending, or every school that you're attending will have a list of scholarships that are available, usually in January or February every year, school-specific scholarships. You're only competing with fellow students at that institution. The employer that you have, employer that your parents have, again, some connection. Scholarships are a tax write-off. They're also a marketing tool. There's a lot of for-profit organizations that offer them because it's great to give back to the community. It's really good for their how they look in the community. It's what it is. It's a win-win for both sides. Religious organizations, another big place, especially if you're active. You should ask your religious organization whether they offer scholarships. I get multiple checks from everywhere, across the board, every different denomination, every single year. The last place that we don't spend enough time on that I think we really should, trade associations. If you know the career that you're getting into, find the trade associations associated with that career. Their whole goal is to promote the industry. One way you promote the industry is by getting people degrees in that area. People don't know this, and no one ever knows this, but there is a National Association of Financial Aid Administrators. It's NASFA. That's me. I'm a member. I pay dues. We have a scholarship. Every year, we give a scholarship out for people who want to work in financial aid. And no one applies for it because no one knows they want to work in financial aid until they apply for financial aid and say, oh, this is really difficult, but maybe I can help someone. But that exists. That's out there. That's true for any trade association. Multiple careers are going to have multiple trade associations, and they're all going to usually have some sort of scholarship opportunity that are available for people that are interested. The last thing I'll mention here, I usually mention a little bit later on. It's not necessarily a scholarship, but employer tuition assistance programs have become much more widespread since the pandemic, especially since summer 2022. Summer 2022, Walmart, Target, and Amazon, all in the space within a week, announced part-time tuition assistance programs that did not exist before. And they did that because they needed to find labor who were willing to work part-time, and they didn't find enough of it. So prior to the pandemic, it was really hard to find tuition assistance for part-time work. Wasn't something I would even talk about usually. Post-pandemic, more and more employers every single month, every single year are adding tuition assistance programs for part-time workers. So if you're going to work while you're in school, you should leverage that not just for the earnings that you're going to have. You should look for an employer that does tuition assistance as part of their benefits package. It's something that's worthwhile to look for now and something to shop for, especially if you're trying to find something to maximize the amount of funding you can put in your pocket. And yes, beware of scams, everyone. Unfortunately, just like with anything that's brand new to people, applying for scholarships is usually brand new to students, and it's very easy for scammers to try to take advantage of a college student, trying to take advantage of a family who may not be familiar with the process. So if it sounds too good to be true, I guarantee you it is. You should not pay money to someone to give you a scholarship. Okay? The idea is put money in your pocket, not take money out of your pocket. I would never encourage anyone paying any kind of money for scholarship searches or paying money to an individual for preferential scholarship treatment, things like that. No one needs your credit card to give you a scholarship. They only need your social security number at the very end of the process when they physically awarded you the scholarship for tax purposes. And so you should not be giving that up front. Right? If we are looking for scholarships, we should look now. Most scholarship deadlines are going to be sometime between January and June. That's because colleges or scholarship organizations are trying to give resources for the fall semester. So if you're looking right now, you're probably not going to find too many open scholarship opportunities, but you can find the ones from this year, and 95% of them are going to be offered next year. Most scholarships are endowed, meaning they're offered every year. And if you find a perfect opportunity that doesn't have a deadline until April 1st, you missed it this year. That's fine. Put it on a spreadsheet, put it on a database, put it on some sort of electronic file so that you can revisit it in 6 months and apply for that scholarship that seemed like a good fit for you. Besides having a spreadsheet, especially in doing research early, encourage everyone to use a calendar to make sure that they're actually applying to those scholarships. They don't forget, especially if you find that wonderful opportunity that seems perfect for you. You should be ready for recommendation letter requirements, and you should make sure you give, of course, just like with any recommendation letter, at least 2 weeks of time, if not more, for a recommender to get a letter, make a letter for you, so it's actually a good letter and personalized, and not just some copy and paste thing that they might use for someone who asks at the last minute. And if you win a scholarship, you need to send thank you letters, and you need to attend any of the events that they host for scholarship winners. Scholarships are not guaranteed to be a every year kind of thing that's renewed. But if you go and you're thankful and you introduce yourself and you tell them your story, they're going to be much more interested in maybe extending your scholarship or giving it to you for a second year and not making you reapply again, or at the very least, just looking positively on you if you have any changes that come up that might cause you, maybe to have to take a semester off or might need to defer your scholarship to a later time. If you make that good impression, maybe they don't just give it to the next person in line. And I'll get that FAFSA question in just a second for the chat. One last piece of info I want to mention about scholarships is this new G3 scholarship program, which is a community college program. One little pitch out there that's got Nova specific stuff in it. It is only for Virginia community colleges. It's Virginia's first foray into free college. The intent of the program is to get people into the workforce quickly. So if you had any interest in looking at the 2-year programs that are offered by Nova that are geared towards immediate entry into a career field after completion, take a look at the G3 scholarship. The cool thing about it is that its income thresholds are much higher than traditional financial aid income thresholds to qualify. So, for example, a family of 4 that's making less than $118,000 a year would be eligible for the G3 program in 24 or 25, 26, which is a full tuition and fee scholarship for anything that is not covered by other resources. So the idea would be if you apply for financial aid, you don't qualify for any other need-based aid, but you do have the G3 eligibility, you get a scholarship that pays for all the tuition and fees for any number of credits that you enroll in for that term. It's a very interesting program, might be expanded in the future. It's a relatively new program. It's, again, Virginia's first foray into free college. Virginia is never going to be the kind of state that just says, hey, free college for everyone. We don't do that. There's going to be prescriptions, there's going to be requirements, there's going to be red tape, of course, but it's very popular. Students have been making a use of it, and funds have been being used on a regular basis every year, and seems to be continue to be renewed. So might want to keep an eye on it, even if you're looking at a 4-year institution, because it could be expanded in the future. Okay. Now, as far as that question about the financial aid application, you can fill out the FAFSA prior to doing a Nova application. You fill out a FAFSA prior to doing a college application, right? I fill out my FAFSA every year and I send it to Harvard just because. They're never going to look at it, but I do. And they have it. If they ever want to pull my info, they will have it. That's fine. They can. But you can do a FAFSA for up to 20 schools at a time, and you can send your FAFSA to any college at any point, even if you haven't been accepted yet. The college is not going to work on your application until you've been accepted. So they're not going to work on it and actually give you details about your eligibility till you've been accepted to the school, but you can pre-send that application to anyone, anytime prior to apply. Okay. Moving on. Again, we have the FAFSA. The FAFSA application is what we're going to use if we're a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, asylum, or refugee. We have a number of students, especially in our area, that do not meet those criteria, but are, they are in high school in Virginia, and they are taking classes, and they are expected to go to college. The state of Virginia tried to address this a couple years ago by providing in-state tuition to a number of these students. If you are graduating from Virginia high school, you pay taxes in Virginia, or your parents pay taxes in Virginia, you may be eligible for in-state tuition, where in the past you were not eligible for in-state tuition. This is of 2017. You also could be eligible then to fill out this thing called the VASA, the Virginia Alternative State Aid Application. Again, the idea here is that these students who can qualify for in-state financial aid or in-state funding, in-state tuition, did not have any means of qualifying for in-state grants. And so that's what this application tries to address. If you are a pending asylee, if you're under DACA, under old DACA, if you are on a number of different immigration statuses that do not provide you automatic pathway to permanent residency, you may still be able to be here permanently. You may still be paying taxes in Virginia, and this gives you an avenue to qualify for in-state tuition and state aid. So that state aid is going to be Commonwealth grant funding and G3 funding. It's not going to be most of the other pools of funding that are out there. It's not going to be federal Pell Grant. It's not going to be federal loans, but it does get you access to Commonwealth grant funding and G3 funding in the state, which can be fairly substantial. At least it's something that these groups and these families did not have access to beforehand. Besides that, I did want to point out this MALDEF scholarship guide. If we're in one of these statuses that may not qualify for federal financial aid, we should take a look at the MALDEF scholarship guide, something like 30 pages of scholarships that do not require citizenship status. There's some that are very state specific and clearly, for California, for example, but there's a number of general applications out there that are for anyone who doesn't meet that for people who don't meet the citizenship criteria that the FAFSA is looking for. Something that I would make use of, and I make use of every year if I fall into that category. And if you got individual questions about the VASA, again, I would be happy to take them, answer them for you or for family or friends that might have them. So how do we get access to all this funding? How do we get access to those grants, scholarships, loans, and work study funds? We do need to complete the FAFSA. FAFSA is an online form completed at studentaid.gov every single year. It uses tax information from a year and a half ago, basically. So as of this December 1st, right, month and a half from now, the FAFSA will open up for the 2025-2020 school year. If you are a senior in high school right now, a parent of a senior in high school right now, this is the application you'll be completing for financial aid for fall 2025 and spring and summer 2026. Keep in mind that it's a yearly application. It is not a one-time ever. It's a yearly application that we renew every single year. So every December, and perhaps as early as October 1st, its dates have changed with this FAFSA simplification I was talking about. We went from an October 1st every year date to a December 1st, to a January 1st, and now to December 1st. Hopefully they go back to October 1st to give everyone more time to complete the application. But you just want to be aware, we're doing it every year. It's usually going to be somewhere between October and December. So as a sophomore, as a junior, as a senior, if we're going to grad school, we need to make sure we're doing this application on a regular basis. Set a phone reminder, right? Set that yearly phone reminder. Treat it like a birthday. FAFSA's birthday is December 1st. I do my FAFSA every year on its birthday because, hey, no one else is celebrating. We'd use tax returns for 2023 if we are looking at the next year's application. We are using 2023 taxes because we haven't done 2024 yet, and not everyone will have those available until April of next year. There are FAFSA filing deadlines. These are called priority FAFSA filing deadlines. And with all the changes that we experienced this past year, those deadlines went out of whack. They used to be pretty consistent. They used to be something we could all rely on. George Mason's is always this date. Nova's is always this date. But the reality is that all changed last year, and colleges and universities we don't have 100% confidence that everything's going to be incredibly smooth this year. So I don't know necessarily what those priority dates are going to fall on. But every college will have what they call a priority FAFSA filing date. If you're looking at multiple institutions, you should make sure you're meeting the FAFSA filing date of the earliest institution. So I'm applying to 10 schools, and 9 of them have deadlines of February 1st, but one of them has a deadline of January 15th. I need to apply before January 15th to make sure that I get accurate financial aid awards for all the schools. If I don't meet that deadline for one of the schools, that one school might not give me all the funding I may have qualified for. Because first come, first serve for a lot of these resources. Priority FAFSA filing deadlines, they change from college to college. Make sure you're checking with the college's website, especially this year, what that deadline might be, because they have moved a lot over the last year and a half. The application is done online. It is an electronic application through studentaid.gov. To be clear, there is a paper application. I'm not going to lie and say there's not a paper application, but you do not want to use it if you do not absolutely have to. The paper form really should only be used if you have no way of completing the electronic application which is only going to be really for most families for technical issues that do not have a resolution. And there's more of those today than I'd like to admit, but they are a very, very small percentage of the overall pool of people that apply for aid. Most families, as of today, can use the FAFSA, use studentaid.gov website just fine, and complete the FAFSA filing process without errors, without issues. There is a account creation process we want to be aware of. Both student and parent in most situations will need something called a studentaid.gov account. That studentaid.gov account is a unique username and password that's tied to your identity. That's where it's very important to type your social name and date of birth in correctly, because it's all keyed in against the Social Security Agency's database. Both student will need an account, it's individual to them. Parent will need an account that's individual to them. And sometimes the second parent will need an account as well. In certain situations, we'll cover that in just a second here. But that is something you could all do today, even though the FAFSA is not available for you, parents of seniors right now, seniors who are on this call. You could all complete a studentaid.gov account application and get that set up today. So it's not something that has to be applied for on the first day of classes. I would encourage everyone to do that, because for many families, there's a 3-day wait period before you can utilize that account. There's a verification process with the Social Security Agency that is not always instantaneous. So applying for a studentaid.gov account today would be a good idea if we do not have one yet. If you used a studentaid.gov account anytime in the last 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, anytime in the last 9 years, you should already have an account, and you'll be using the same one that you may have used for your own education or for another sibling's or another family member's education. The student will sign electronically by typing in, logging in with their username and password. Parents will be doing the same exact thing. Some things to be aware of. When you're filing the application, students will complete their piece. I actually just want to show you this because this is kind of the flow. We're going to be going to studentaid.gov. We're going to have an account already created. The student is going to start their application, start the 25-26 application. They are going to complete information, answer questions about demographics. They're going to answer questions about the school they're attending, answer questions about the high school they've been to, and then they're answering questions about their parents. Parents are also called contributors for the FAFSA. You see this contributor naming nomenclature here. That means basically parent. Your parents are going to be identified as contributors, and you're going to type in their demographic info, possibly both of their demographic info if both parents are involved in the household, and you're going to invite them to complete your FAFSA. When the parent receives, the parents will receive an email inviting them to log into their own studentaid.gov account. And if everything has been done correctly and parents' names have been typed in correctly into that invite, when they log into their studentaid.gov account, there'll be a big screen there that says, you have been invited as a contributor to your student's application for financial aid. Please click this link to continue. They enter the link. You'll answer the same set of questions students were asked about income. You'll be asked questions about assets and home size, and some questions about untaxed income. We've taken the FAFSA from 109 questions all the way down to something like 39 questions, and a 60% decrease. It is huge and far less busy work that families are going to be doing, but there still are some questions that are listed on that application that need to be answered. And there's some standard questions that are not going to go away, like assets and questions about did we file a tax return. But again, very important we understand, students do their part and invite the parents now. We used to have the FAFSA all completed in one line, right? All at once. So the idea was students started, and then halfway through, the parent came in and did their section, and it was all completed on the same exact application without multiple logins. Now there's going to be at least 2 logins, 2 FAFSA ID or studentaid.gov account logins for every interaction, sometimes 3. Situations where you're going to need both parents to have a studentaid.gov account, or situations where the parents are married but file separate tax returns. So married filing separate tax returns, or recently married and we filed the 2023 tax returns, maybe we filed them as our old status, which may have been single or had a household, for example. When parents are married but do not have joint tax returns, the tax information from the IRS cannot be downloaded into your application. And so we usually have to hand type that info or do separate accounts. There's separate accounts that are created for both parents, and they both have to individually complete and consent to have their information transferred from the IRS into a student's application. I kind of jumped ahead a little bit on that, so I'm sorry. The big change, probably the biggest change with the FAFSA this year outside of the questions being reduced, is that everyone must consent to have the IRS transmit information into their FAFSA. It's a If you've done a FAFSA before, we had something called data retrieval. This is data retrieval on steroids. This is a much higher form of it. It is much more keyed in and tied with the databases with the IRS. And there's a lot more requirements in place, not really that you actually have to do anything for, but there's a lot more kind of a release. You sign off on basically saying, I give consent, and you're signing off on something that's about a page and a half long, with understanding that the IRS will transfer information into your FAFSA. It will be masked, so you don't actually get to see the data that's transmitted in. You just have to trust the IRS, which I know might be difficult for us to do, but yes, we have to trust the IRS. The information they're transferring is accurate. I've been doing this for about 6 months now with the system. I haven't seen any inaccurate information transferred in. Again, might need both parents to sign off on this application. We do have paper forms. We do not want to use them. For parents that do not have Social Security numbers, they can now create FSA IDs. That was another big change this year. In previous years, a student without a parent without a Social Security number had to do a paper signature process or a paper FAFSA form. That was their only options. Now they can create an FSA ID, and that creation process does work. They should be using the electronic process just like a parent with a Social Security number. Again, I think we covered the first 2 points already about this exchange of information. It's required. You can't, even if you consent and they don't pull your tax information in, sometimes there's data conflicts, mismatched name. They will keep trying, and at some point they will find your info and pull it into your application and update it before they consider it an official application. There are a couple questions. I mentioned that a lot of questions were cut. There's a couple questions about untaxed income that are still included that I always like to point out. Child support received is a question on the FAFSA that remains. They no longer treat that as income. It used to be treated as income, which had a greater weight on the student aid index. It increased the student aid index at a higher rate. Now it's treated as an asset, which is going to be beneficial for those families that do have to report it. We also are now reporting the net value of a business or farm as an asset. We kind of always had farms listed, but now business assets are technically reported as an asset if you have paid off assets that do not have any liabilities attached to them. Kind of a unique sort of year this year as we were trying to work through which situations need to report them, which didn't. Something that I'd be happy to answer offline for anyone that had unique questions about that. We also, something that is not as beneficial to families is we no longer are giving families credit for having multiple students in college at the same time. Now, it used to be under the old formulas that if you had a 10,000 SAI and you had 2 students entering college at the same time, the SAI was split between both students. The idea was that resources for that home, half would go to one student, half would go to the other. In the effort of simplification and removing the requirement that students or that colleges need to verify that the student's going to another school and is eligible to be considered in college, they just have gotten rid of they've gotten rid of the allowance that was given for having multiple students in college. If you're at an institution that has a lot of its own assets, a lot of its own resources, they may still factor that in for you. They may do their own calculation for institutional aid and factor in that you've got a kid at multiple institutions, but probably only for the next couple of years. It's probably going to be grandfathered in for students who were under the old system that was in place a year ago. And I would expect that to kind of all go away very shortly here. So again, used to be, hey, you had twins, you had triplets, yeah, college is going to be expensive, but at least they factor that in. It's not really factored in anymore. And so something I would bring up with the college you're looking at attending if it's something that concerns you. As I've been talking tonight, I've been talking from the perspective that most students on this call, most families on this call are going to be dependents. A dependent student must provide parental information, and they must provide parental information that impacts their student aid index until they're 24, right? Not 21, not 18, but 24. And so the assumption is that most students are dependent. There are situations where you are independent before the age of 24. I've got the ones that make you automatically independent listed on here. We're married. We join the military, we graduate from a 4-year program of study, we have children or dependents of our own that we're supporting and can prove we're supporting greater than 50% financially. Those are all avenues to become independent automatically. We also have an appeal process for circumstances that are not covered in these automatic statuses. If you cannot reach your parents because they are in a war-torn country, that can be grounds for you to be independent. You'll have to document that in some fashion. If you can't reach your parents because they're mentally incapacitated, they're incarcerated, or if there's some sort of health or safety issue with you reaching to them and getting their information, you can bring that up with your college. In many cases, you might be able to file an appeal and be treated as an independent. Every situation is unique. I would encourage anyone here that's concerned about that to reach out to me directly or reach out to their college directly. What I've linked in this slide is Nova's appeal form. So, which is, I don't want to say standard, but it's the information we ask for is pretty common, which you're going to see in other appeal forms if you're trying to get an idea of what would need to be provided to be independent at another institution. Colleges also have the option of exercising what we call professional judgment. This means that while we have to use 2023 taxes to initially file your application, we can say, hey, you know what? 2024 was vastly different. Parent lost a job in 2024. Parent lost a big source of revenue for their small business in 2024. They no longer have a client. And those are all things that could lead to a reduction of your income, and could also lead to you being able to file an income reduction appeal, which allows the college to consider more recent tax data or more recent income data. We even can consider for next year, we would be able to consider estimates for 2025. You know, if we get through 2025 and we're in July and you lost your job at the beginning of the year, you might be able to come to the college and say, hey, you know what, my 2023 and 2024 numbers are, yeah, they're accurate, but since January, I haven't had a job and haven't had regular income. The college can take that into account and possibly rework your application based on estimated income as well. At four-year institutions, you might also see cost of attendance appeals. That goes back into what we were talking about at the very beginning, where you have cost of attendance that equals your student aid index, and there's nothing they can give you. But maybe if they can increase their cost of attendance just for you, maybe there's some grounds to give you money or give you a scholarship. And that's going to be unique usually to four-year institutions that kind of got that flexibility. But you should be aware of it and something that you should be asking about, especially if you know you're meeting or hitting that unmet need limit there. All right, we're just getting up to the last couple slides, I think. Yep. Just one second. Oh, we're not going to cover all these topics, but these are topics that I would be researching myself if I was a parent or a student and I was a min-maxer and want to maximize the good, minimize the bad. So, do any of my schools require a CSS profile? If we're going to schools with a lot of their own resources, with large endowment, those schools do not necessarily believe that they get enough information from the FAFSA to make an informed decision about who should get their money. And there's reasons for that. The FAFSA takes into account assets, but it doesn't take into account your primary dwelling. It also doesn't take into account retirement accounts. So a family that's living in a $2 million home that is fully paid off and has an income of $50,000 a year is treated the exact same as a family with $50,000 of income living in a two-bedroom apartment. Renting, it doesn't matter the fact that they have the first family has equity. They're treated the exact same for the student aid index. And so the CSS profile is like an extension. It's a financial aid application that has about 17 pages of information and is ask much more detailed questions about you and your family's finances. They are going to get into your equity in your primary home. They're going to get into your retirement accounts. They're going to ask whether or not grandparents have accounts for students that are not checked and reviewed on the FAFSA. It is a additional application. It's going to be required again at not all schools, but schools with large endowments, a lot of their own resources. And I think in Virginia, those schools are University of Richmond, UVA, William and Mary, maybe Washington Lee, I believe. I believe there's 4 schools in Virginia that have that as a requirement. But again, if you're going to a school that has a CSS profile requirement, you want to fill it out, especially if you're applying for financial aid, because they're not going to give you any of their institutional resources if they don't have that additional data from you. You want to look at the tax implications of using a 529 or other college savings plan. College savings plans allow you to invest money into the stock market, into stock indexes that are controlled by either the state or the investing institution, and to then take those gains. And if those gains are used to pay for direct college expenses like tuition and fees, those gains are not taxable. There are a bunch of ways to make them taxable, though, by pulling them out incorrectly or dispersing them to the school incorrectly. So you want to make sure you are getting those funds to the school in the right way so that you do not incur a tax penalty or have to pay taxes on earnings. Higher ed tax credits, there's something called the American Opportunity Tax Credit out there for many individuals. It's $2,500 per year, $2,500 per year, $1,500 of which can be refunded. This is money that you get a tax credit on simply because you pay it out of pocket for school. It's dollar for dollar credit in a lot of situations. You should be factoring that in. I bring it up because, of course, right, we file our taxes, and a lot of times we're waiting for that nice tax return, and we have plans for that tax return. Well, if you've got a student in college now, if they are not paying everything, if they're paying anything out of pocket or paying anything with student loan funding, they very likely are going to have a tax credit they can file for, or the parent can file for if they're claiming for them. And we want to try to account for that money and not just lump it into that tax return we get, account for that money and set it aside for college expenses, really, because that's what it's for. And you know, if you just get surprised that you have more money this year in your tax refund because your students in school, you know, that's great. But in the perfect world, we're going to use that money for school related expenses, help that student out, at least factor that in so that we are treating that as part of the resource that we have to pay for school, and not just, oh, hey, wonderful, we got more money this year. It's, you're getting it for a reason. You're getting it because you're paying out of pocket or using a loan to pay for college. You should do some research on the academic common market. If we're interested in a program of study that's not offered in Virginia, the academic common market allows you to get in-state tuition at bordering states that may offer that program. The example I use is I had a very good friend in school, back when I was in school, who was going to get a degree in surveying. His family had a surveying company, wanted to get a degree in surveying, take over the business. We did not offer a surveying degree in Virginia, but there was one offered at East Tennessee State, and he was able to go to East Tennessee State and pay in-state tuition there because of the academic common market and because no program was offered in Virginia. Again, you want to read the fine print very carefully on that, because if he changed his program, he immediately would have been an out-of-state student. Changed his mind about what he wanted to pursue, would have been paying out-of-state tuition, might have been a dicey situation for him. So you do want to make sure you understand what you're getting into if you sign up. Tuition discounting, I kind of mentioned this again already. Just to be clear, you know, a lot of private institutions, even a lot of public institutions with a large endowment, a lot of them can give money to everyone. They give a little bit to everyone, right? Just because you win a scholarship, just because you win a grant from that school, doesn't mean it's the best fit for you, or doesn't mean it's the best economic fit for you, right? You need to look at the net price. I have a sister that was in law school recently. She had a choice between public institution and private institution. She had both been accepted to. The private institution was $50,000 a year. The public institution was $25,000 a year. She won a scholarship from the private institution for $25,000. She was ecstatic to a degree. And then I came in with, you know, Mr. Negative Nancy, because that's what I do. Said, well, what are you paying at both schools? It's $25,000. It's the same exact price for both schools. She was dead set on picking the one that she got $25,000 from because they gave her $25,000. But in the grand scheme of things, all it did was make it cost the same as a public school. They were equally rated. There was not one leg up over the other. It just, you know, was the nature of things. And so again, she made the decision she wanted to make. She wanted to go to the private institution. That scholarship allowed her to do it, allowed her to do it financially, but it wasn't the best financial deal for her. It just made it an option for her. Keep that in mind. Net price is important. Just because they give you money doesn't mean that's the school you pick. Make sure you're factoring in the overall cost, whether you're going to be living on campus, what those other expenses are going to be at that institution before you make your final decision. Last guy on here, income share agreements. Put this on here so people are aware of them and are wary of them. An income share agreement is kind of a reversal of the idea of how we're going to pay for college. Rather than borrowing debt, a institution or a financial institution will say, we own 3% of your salary for the next 6 years. We own 2% of your salary for the next 10 years. Might sound good on paper, but a lot of things that I've seen, a lot of studies and even articles I've seen about income share agreements is that a lot of times students are getting shafted. They are getting the short end of the stick. Make sure that you're looking at income share agreements. Again, they're very unique to very specific institutions, and they've got a lot of negative publicity in the last maybe year. So they're not expanding as they once were, but they still are offered. There's still a method of payment for college out there. Make sure you know what you're getting into and you read the fine print of those agreements if it's something that you want to sign up for. I think I got 2 slides left, everyone. We're almost there. Just some things that I run into on a regular basis. People will tell me if I save money, I'm not going to get financial aid. So why do I save money? You know, there's some truth in that. I don't want to say it's the right, it's not the right analysis to come to, right decision to come to, but yes, if you save $1 and you report that as an asset, a piece of that dollar will be considered as part of your student aid index. It's something like 4 to 5 cents for parents and something like 20 cents for students. But I'd always take the dollar. It's way more. I'd take the guaranteed dollar that I saved over the potential for 4 cents more of aid or 5 cents more of aid or 20 cents more of aid, depending on who it belongs to. I would not necessarily just automatically say, well, I'm not getting financial aid. I might as well blow all my money because that's how I maximize my funds. I'll take a dollar every day that I can save and hold on to over the expectation of potential aid. Realistic expectations, kind of talked about that already, but how do I have those conversations? Like, so how do you talk with the students? Students, how do you talk with your families, or how do you just figure out what you're going to earn for college, right? I know this might surprise some of you, but most college students think they're going to make way more money than they're actually going to make. It's not the other way around. There's usually the feeling that we're going to be far more successful and be compensated at a much higher level than we really are. So it's important to keep in mind realistic expectations. What are you going to earn? If you are going to work as a teacher, that's your ultimate goal. We don't make rich teachers. They don't do that. That's not what happens. You have a salary that hopefully pays your bills, allows you to go on vacation, allows you to pay your bills, have a family, but you are not going to become wealthy. That's okay, right? Hopefully you get a lot out of your job and you have that feeling of I'm doing greater good. That's what we're doing. And that's why I'm financial aid. I didn't pick the right profession to make a whole lot of money. But if you know that going in, you can make sure that you're not borrowing too much, that you're not incurring too much debt for a career that's not going to be able to pay it off. When we have articles that go out that say college isn't worth it anymore, when people start talking about that in the media, that's because we have mismatched expectations with what we're going to earn against what we can pay for school. Not all of us can go to a private institution and pay the full price and make it have it be a good financial decision. And not all of us can go to a public institution and pay the full price and have it be a good financial decision. We need to make sure that the college that we're attending and the earnings that we're going to have after college make sense. If you're going to have something like this as far as income trajectory, you have a lot more flexibility with what you pay for school. If you're going to have something like this with income trajectory, you need to care a lot more now. If you can care a lot more, I encourage you, care a lot more now, because your life is going to be impacted far more by what you end up borrowing. And that last one, just really, no one told me. No one told me doesn't get you any more financial aid. It doesn't make the deadline get extended. It doesn't change priority FAFSA filing requirements. It doesn't do any of that. So no one told me is no good. If you say no one told me today, to me, I have permanently lost the ability to feel sorry for that statement. Just so we're on the same page, most financial aid administrators are the same. So there is an unfair expectation that you have read the fine print on all of our financial aid emails and messages, that you've read the student handbook, that you are aware of what capitalized interest means, that you know what we mean by half-time enrollment. There's a maybe an unfair expectation of that, but know that that's at the expectation of your school, right? They think that you have done your reading and your due diligence. And if you don't do that, you are the one who's going to pay for it, because no one told me doesn't get anything for you. It doesn't make you get more money, and it doesn't help you complete a FAFSA by a certain deadline or complete verification by a certain deadline. Talked about a couple of these places already. Studentaid.gov, of course. College Scorecard. College Scorecard is a wonderful option for families exploring costs of school, because it just doesn't give you the average cost or the stated cost of attendance like the college will give you. It gives you the different average costs over 5 different income brackets. And you will see that families in the lowest income bracket are paying much less than families in the highest income bracket. It's a wonderful tool. It doesn't get enough publicity. It doesn't get enough use. You should make use of it if you're comparing multiple schools together, because you don't have to dig through a school's resources. And if you try to find the cost of a college on their website, it does not do them any good to make it clear to you, right? Costs are what scare us. They're always going to be hidden. They're always going to be buried. And a lot of times I can't even understand what they're trying to tell you, and I work in the industry. So take a look at this college scorecard for average cost. It is information reported directly from the colleges on a yearly basis. They're required by law to do it, and it is accurate info. And it's really surprising the variance you'll see between 2 schools. I was looking at UVA's today, and they have a $20,000 difference between costs between lowest income bracket and highest income bracket. That's pretty standard and something you want to be aware of, because the average is the average, or what your friend paid is what your friend paid. Everyone is going to pay a different amount of money because of financial aid and because of scholarship resources that exist. You want to have an accurate expectation as early as possible, and this college scorecard helps you do that. BLS.gov, the Occupational Outlook Handbook, that was on my last screen, but the Occupational Outlook Handbook is a wonderful tool for having those conversations about what we're going to earn, what we're going to earn in school. It has something like 300, 400 different professions listed. It has the average earnings. It has the type of education needed. It even has whether or not the field is expanding or contracting. Guys, along with expectations about earnings, you need to know whether the field you're getting into is contracting or expanding. If it's contracting, you need to separate yourself out from your fellow students in your program. If you want to get a degree you want a degree in that field that leads to a job in that field, and the job market is contracting, you're going to have to beat out other people. That's just the way it is. And you want to know that as early as possible. If your job market is expanding, I don't want to say you can be, an average student. We want to always try to aim for success and aim for excellence, but you've got more options. You may not have to meet every single, do an internship every single moment. You might not have to do all these extra things to separate yourself from your fellow students, because there'll be plenty of jobs for you. So again, something to be aware of and something you should be considering, along with all those other factors about college fit. FinAid.org. FinAid.org is the tips and tricks website for financial aid. If you were looking for, do I have to report this asset? Or is there anything that I can do with my savings to make it so I don't have to report them? Those kinds of questions, I would encourage you to visit FinAid.org, because they give you accurate, detailed information that is based in financial policy and accurate financial aid information. Last place that we have listed on here, the payscale.com/college. Just something to think about. It's not the decision making. It's basically a measure of a total cost of college over 4 years for both in-state and out-of-state students, against the average earnings, I believe, over a 20-year period or 25-year period for those same students. Simple return on investment calculation. Again, not something that by itself should make the decision for you as far as where you go to school, but something you should consider, because that's not posted anywhere on a college's website, the return on investment. And you'll be very surprised if you compare apples to apples, two public four-year institutions together, how different their ROA can really be. Yeah, if you compare MIT to, Mary Washington University, my alma mater, it's not going to look great. It's not. But if you compare Mary Washington to other 4 years, you'll see that some have higher returns on investment for pretty much the same exact cost. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's something that I certainly would care about, and I would encourage you all to care about, since in the grand scheme of things, really the whole point of getting that degree. Higher return on investment, higher economic mobility, better chance of the job that lets you live the lifestyle of a college graduate you want to live. Now, that all being said, everyone, thank you for being with me tonight. Let me just go back here. You've got my contact information down there, jzaguirre@nvcc.edu. I'm going to put it in the chat window as well. Thank you very much for doing that. Please, again, I do not care where you go to college. I'm happy to answer any questions about any institution. I'm happy. I want to retire someday. As I said, I've got one of those jobs that did this. So for me to retire someday, I need Social Security, and I need everyone on this call to get high-paying jobs so the Social Security system remains funded. So it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned. I'm more than happy to help you with any kinds of financial aid questions that you have for any institution. And I will, if I don't know the answer to something, I will try to find it for you. Thank you all for being with me tonight. I'm going to leave this on for just a minute so that if we have questions, you all can get those questions answered. And we're just going to stop the recording now, move on to those questions. If you have individual unique questions, feel free